Beautiful.
Hello, lovers of the world. This is Cinta speaking. I love listening to new music. It's really fun to find new things to obsess over, whether that's a new album, a new artist, or a new song. I'm always trying to chase that sense of joy and triumph of finding something new to love. It is once again time to reflect and rank every album and EP that I listened to recently in a tier list. I am officially back from traveling around Europe, but as you can see, I did not feel up to filming this video with my face. And now that I've discovered this shortcut of posting this review as basically a podcast episode with some photos to supplement the lack of video, I am going to start utilizing it where I feel like I just cannot achieve it otherwise. But just like last time, I will be adding photos from my trip to add some visual interest to the video, although I can imagine that even before, some of you were probably already content to have just this video in the background as if it was a podcast episode anyways. I am so excited to release this video just to kind of get my groove back on. This is obviously my favorite series to do. Now I have to warn you that because I was traveling so much, I actually didn't listen to a lot of stuff while I was on the go. I did not force myself to listen to more than what I felt like I could take, hence the pretty short list of things I did end up listening to. And because of how short this list was, I actually combined what I listened to in June and July in this video. In fact, to be more specific, I only listened to 12 albums while I was away, with 9 albums in June and 3 albums in July. As usual, I've added timestamps in the description of when I start talking about a specific album, so if you can skip to those parts if you only want to watch them. And just in case we have new viewers, this will be odd if you are a new viewer, but I will break down my reviewing system first. But if you are not a new viewer, you are welcome to skip to the first album if you don't want to hear my explanation of how I review and reflect on music. Just so we're all on the same page, this is how I conceptualize my tier list. The top of the tier list is called year-end list material. This tier is specifically for releases that came out this year. This is a way for me to keep track of new projects and to remind myself to look back on these new releases when the time comes at the end of the year to make my year-end list. Only releases that came out this year are allowed to be on this tier because those are obviously the only ones I will consider for that list. Meanwhile, in the tiers below, any project can be put in from any year. Aside from the obvious reason of putting albums in this tier because they were my favorite releases of the year, I also take into consideration how that album fits into the context of my own personal life, like whether or not it marks a specific event or a specific point where I know I will always remember the years to come. And I also like to take into consideration the impact of that album in a kind of wider societal pop culture sense. I try not to let the trends influence me too much, but I feel like if, for example, this album was just so ubiquitous, it was just so everywhere that it's kind of difficult to not detach that from the year that I'm reviewing it in. And I find that increasingly relevant as the older I get and the more I look back on some of my favorite albums of the past years and seeing like, oh, like when I listen to this album, like I feel like I'm instantly transported back to the year that it was released and the time that I had listened to it. And to me, that's kind of important the more my reviewing style adapts and changes as I listen to more music. Then the tier below that is called French Toast. So these are the albums and projects that I found were perfectly enjoyable. So I've named this tier French Toast because it is a play on a tier that we'll talk about a little bit later on. Everybody likes a good French toast. Like, French toast is tasty, it's delicious. You can tell when it's well done. And that's kind of how I view this album. Like, you can comfortably say that it's a really well executed album. It's a project that you can easily find praise for. Like, you don't have to really think too hard about coming up with something nice to say about it, because I feel like there's a general consensus that it is a well done or well executed project. This is unfortunately the highest an album can be placed in if that album was not released in 2025. This tier also houses albums that, even even though I really enjoyed, I don't think I will be considering for the year-end list. However, these tiers are not necessarily set in stone, so if that album was released in this year and was possibly placed in French Toast or even in the tiers below that, they do have a chance of moving up to the very top if I end up changing my mind as time progresses. The tier below French Toast is called Gems Found in the Mind. So albums placed in this tier have a few treasured tracks that really stood out to me, songs that I will remember, songs that I will possibly keep in my heavy rotation, even if I didn't necessarily love, capital L, love the album itself. That is kind of the biggest difference between this tier and the tier below that, which is what I've called the most album ever. Albums in this tier are those that I found were done with a lot of effort but didn't really stood out in a significant way. None of the tracks are particularly memorable. Another difference between this tier and the one above that is that I feel like I can comfortably recommend albums and gems found in the mind, whereas in the most album ever, I would kind of struggle a little bit to really explain to a stranger or a friend like what the thesis of this project was. There won't be anything that leaps to the eye that would remind me that, oh yeah, I listened to this album and this is how I felt about it. The tier below that is called, well, I learned something new. So I always try to frame my reflections on music as not super particularly negative. Even if I don't particularly like something, I always try to kind of soften the blow with why I don't like something. So albums in this tier are those that I tried to expand my horizons with, and I always like to keep up to date with new releases, whether that's an artist that I consistently keep up with, or if it's an artist that I've been hearing a lot about and this is kind of my first time trying out their music. If I listened to something and it wasn't really for me, but I at least learned something about myself, about the artist, about the genre, about the world, even though I didn't particularly like it, this is where I would put that album in. Unfortunately, I still do have to have a bottom tier, and I've called that the eggs you break for your French toast. So I called this tier the eggs you break for your French toast because it's kind of a play on the more common and the correct idiom of like, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And the thing is, like, I could have just named my tier the perfect omelet or something like that, but I wanted it to be French toast because I like French toast more than omelets. That's literally the only reason why they're called French toast and the eggs you break for your French toast. So again, this is a more positive way of saying that I really didn't like this album, but I'm glad that I gave it a shot. Albums in this tier, I am a little bit more inclined to say that they've kind of wasted my time. I feel like that's still harsh to say, but in your search for music that really resonates with you, you will just inevitably come across music that you just don't like, and that's totally okay. You kind of have to just go through a couple of albums that you're not gonna love in order to find something new, something fresh, and discover different things about different artists, different genres, different points in time, different communities. And again, I always try to frame everything as a learning experience, but albums in this tier will tend to be stuff that I find a particular frustration with because it feels like they let me down and they didn't really teach me something that I didn't already know. And again, I always hesitate to call an album bad. I find when it comes to personal taste, especially with music, all the things that you dislike about something are all the reasons why somebody else might love that same thing. Another disclaimer, by the way, is that just because I put an album on this tier doesn't mean that I hate that artist. I am just grading that particular release, obviously taking into account the artist's greater discography, but I'm not saying that as a moral or strict statement about how I feel about that artist from this point onwards to the end of time, you know? So with that out of the way, let's get into what I listened to. First, I listened to All For You by Janet Jackson. Janet Jackson is an American singer-songwriter. Being the sister to the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson, I feel like it is redundant trying to give background info on who Janet Jackson is, but for some context, she is a member of the very famous Jackson family. While she performed with her siblings for a short time in the 70s, she released her debut album album in 1982 as a soloist. This is her 7th studio album released in 2001. This album has a few singles, the most popular being All For You and of course Someone to Call My Lover. Ever since Someone to Call My Lover went viral, it has been on my mind to do a discography dive on Janet Jackson. I obviously chose this one to start with because it had Someone to Call My Lover on it, which to me seemed like as good as any to start on. After this, I will continue with the discography dive in chronological order to better contextualize her career, but I just thought that since this is the only album that had a song that I knew from her, that I might as well start off with this one. And I really have to emphasize the fact that this is the only song I knew of Janet Jackson for basically until last year. Janet Jackson did not really feature prominently in my childhood in the Philippines nor in New Zealand, so I really felt like I was starting from scratch with her. All For You is a really dense text. I tend to go into these albums blind to get a fresh and unbiased opinion of the project, of the record, but the singles being what they are did not really prepare me for the album to progress the way that it did. I came up with 4 key words to describe the kinds of songs I found here, as I was not confident in pinning these musical styles down into specific genres. I chose seductive, upbeat, experimental, and resigned as my keywords. The album starts off pretty upbeat, disco, dance heavy in the beginning, with tracks like You Ain't Right, All For You, and Come On Get Up as the stronger highlights. Then it rather abruptly switches to a more adult and more sexual atmosphere with tracks like When We Ooh, China Love, Love Scene, Would You Mind. I did not expect for the album to sound like this in the middle. It is so strongly R&B that it's just music to like have sex to, a soundtrack to intimacy and passion that while I find commendable, I personally just do not relate on a personal level. I do think that it being broken up with interludes helps signal the start of one mood and emotion and the beginning of another. But again, it was rather sudden and I felt rather thrown off because just as I thought I knew what the album was gonna become, it switches up on me. And again, that's totally fine. I actually appreciated this surprise, but it was just something so unexpected as to what I thought the project was gonna be going into it. Another thing is I'm personally not as receptive to music without lyrics as I am to music with lyrics, so that played a huge part in my feelings about that specific section. We then circle back to that dance upbeat vibe in the latter half with songs like Someone to Call My Lover, Feel So Right, and Doesn't Really Matter. It is in the latter half of the album where Jackson's production starts to lean into the experimental. There are these flashes of classical music, which to me screams late 90s, early 2000s, where hip-hop and black music in general experimented with these specific flourishes. This is most obviously seen in the track Someone to Call My Lover, which samples Gymnopédie by Eric Satie, but also in the mock operetta features of Trust a Try that is also mixed in with hard rock. Trust a Try is so chaotic and stressful as the layers just build on top of each other as it reaches its crescendo. It is a very interesting song. As I said, this is a very dense text. There are many things that flew over my head or ideas that I didn't recognize due to my limited taste/palette in music. One thing I did recognize on my own was the interpolation of Carole King's song You're So Vain, which came out in 1972 in the track Son of a Gun, I Betcha Think This Song Is About You. Last keyword I came up with is resigned, which is only really features a very small portion of the album because that is how I would describe the tracks Truth and Better Days, which are songs with lyrics that feature wisdom that can only come from experience and pain. Overall, I found this to be a very interesting album, but not something I found myself reaching for frequently, particularly when a bulk of the album consisted of tracks that were, again, not really something I related to. So I think I'm just gonna put this in Gems Found in the Mine. My favorite songs are All For You and Someone to Call My Lover, which again makes sense given that they are the most pop adjacent tracks in the whole project, and also probably why they chose those songs to be the singles. But I also did like Truth, and I also liked Feel So Right. And then I listened to Mayhem by Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga is another artist that doesn't really need an introduction either. She is an undeniable force of pop culture, a pioneer in the truest sense. This is her 7th studio album, released in 2025, and is significant for being the first album Lady Gaga has released after a long break from music making, at least in the pop scene. For the past few years, Lady Gaga has dedicated her time and efforts to being an actress, most recently in her playing Harley Quinn in Joker 2, of which she had also written an entire album about, titled aptly Harlequin. She has also performed songs for other movies like A Star Is Born and Top Gun. The thing is, I have not really listened to that many nor really engaged with a lot of Lady Gaga's deeper catalog. My relationship with her is very much dictated by her bigger moments and singles, her looks, her performances, and the way that she has shaped pop culture through osmosis, rather than diving deeper into her actual bodies of work. In fact, I have only listened to The Fame, her first debut album, and Chromatica, which is the album released before Mayhem. And that was definitely not enough context for me to fully wrap my head around this new project. Is it that the album is sonically all over the place, part of the concept of Mayhem? Because it goes from the classic Lady Gaga camp to radio pop to disco dance to boomer belting rock to gut-wrenching ballad. It's really hard for me to pin down what the album actually wants to be, and again, that might be because I have not had a lot of experience with the actual albums that Lady Gaga has released, and due to the fact that Lady Gaga is such an insane performer, I can't help but feel that she could really just be singing from a phone book and it would sound mind-blowing, so it doesn't really matter what genre she does, she's gonna still execute it really well. I think if you see this album as a way for her to act as well as sing, then perhaps all these genre switches make more sense as her showing off her multifaceted skills as an entertainer. The key words for this album I chose are unexpected and uncertainty. I was not really prepared for this album to be so heavily rock ballad adjacent, but again, I think if I just thought about it harder, you could kind of see the flashes of her ballads from her previous movies, as well as what she had done in Joanne, at least with a single like A Million Reasons, all kind of coming together to make Mayhem the way that it is. The song The Beast is reminiscent of In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins to me. It's a very stadium rock song that I think could have benefited from more grit, or really what I mean is that this shouldn't have been produced like a pop song and produced more like a rock song, because the final product is a little bit too clean, a little bit too polished. If the instrumentation felt more rugged and rough around the edges, that would have, I think, sold this story and delivery a lot more to me. Hopefully that makes sense. I find this happens a lot more with K-pop, where, for example, K-pop groups will have like a quote-unquote rock concept, but the producers are still going to polish it up until it shines, so it kind of loses that veneer of what is meant to be rock. And I feel the same way with this particular track. I think if this was performed live, this would go so crazy. I like the song Shadow of a Man. It sounds very harrowing. Blade of Grass and Die With a Smile are also very devastating. But yeah, I didn't really expect the album to lean so much into this emotional, high-intensity vocal performance, because I did not realize that Die With a Smile was a Lady Gaga song. I thought it belonged to Bruno Mars. I had no idea that it was going to end up in the final track list for Mayhem, which may sound insignificant to you guys, but I had known that Die With a Smile was going to be in Mayhem. My expectations for the album would have been completely different to accommodate for the fact that, okay, if Die With a Smile is part of Mayhem, then I can expect to hear a little bit more of this sound in that final product. All of this to say that I feel kind of like a mixed bag with this album. I will say that I love the track order of this record. The listener is taken on a journey through the stylistic shifts in genres, so that by the time we reach Die With a Smile, the closer, it feels comfortable to be there. I chose the other keyword as uncertainty because I don't really know where I go from here. And I really hate to say this about a Lady Gaga album, but I didn't really connect with this at all. I can feel that this is a great album with a lot of effort and a very strong thesis with a very cogent musical identity, but I don't really see myself coming back to this often. It's not really supplementing my life in now in a significant way, so I'm just gonna put this in Gems Found in the Mind. Funnily enough, for all of the compliments I gave to Lady Gaga for experimenting with kind of a rockier vibe, I actually really preferred the exact opposite track from this album, which is How Bad Do You Want Me, which is just giving 1989 Taylor Swift, which everyone on the internet has spoken up about. It is the only song that I keep coming back to. Not to say that it's like the best song of the album, but it just happens to be the catchiest one. And sometimes that's really the only way to win at this game. And then I listened to Neumann by Baan. Baan is a South Korean band who released their first album in 2022 and dabbles in post-metal, sludge metal, shoegaze, noise rock, stoner rock, and post-hardcore. This album was released in 2025 and features the work of Agent Glow, another artist that I've talked about on this channel and is another prominent figure in the South Korean shoegaze community. I didn't really know what to expect from this project, but this was definitely interesting. I first listened to this when I was walking around in Berlin on a cloudy day, and I don't think that was necessarily the best choice. I was already quite overwhelmed by being in a very new city and trying to find my way around, and I just don't think that I chose this as the right soundtrack. Afterwards, I thought that maybe listening to this project in a less chaotic setting where I can actually pay attention to the music would help, but I found that it didn't actually, and I had to concede to a form of defeat with this record. I think I listened to this at the wrong time and it did not finish seeping in my mind before I had to get this video out. I also didn't want to force myself to listen to this too many times when I was clearly not feeling it, but I can't help but feel like I should go back to this record when I'm ready, and this is probably just an instance where if I come back to it, it might yield a better result. So for now, I'm just gonna put this in Gems Found in the Mind and we'll revisit this in the future. And then I listened to Addison Rae's debut album, Addison. Lord, where do I even begin with Addison Rae? You either love her or hate her, it seems. Addison Rae started off as a TikTok influencer from 2019 onward. She used to be in a content house called The Hype House, I believe, and she was in some kind of high-profile relationships with other fellow TikTokers. Personally, I never got into TikTok because I personally do not like being on that app. I did make an account back in 2020, but I just did not like the vibes of that cursed platform, and I think that was the right choice. So I completely missed out on Addison's career as a TikTok content creator, along with most of the discourse surrounding her before she became a pop star. The first time I was formally introduced to Addison was actually when my younger sister pulled me aside and showed me Addison's performance of her song Obsessed at Jimmy Fallon's show, and she asked me if I liked the song or the performance, and I responded, yeah, that was a good performance, and doesn't really matter to me if she's lip syncing or not, which I think at the time was the big deal. But the song to me was just average. Then I gave her 2021 EP AR a try, and I actually really enjoyed listening to it. Here I am providing the receipts of my Last FM stats. I am streaming nothing on but the radio as if it was my job, and admittedly that was a Lady Gaga throwaway demo, but so what, it was still a hit in my room. Addison had been drumming up some goodwill from pop stan Twitter addicts by hanging around Charli XCX and Troye Sivan for a while, as well as being a prominent feature in the Sweat Tour. I actually think that played a bigger role in her rise, more so than her debut EP did, because who the heck else was tuning into Addison Rae at that stage of her career? I'm not entirely sure. And you have to admit that her feature in the Von Dutch remix is pretty iconic. By the time Diet Pepsi had rolled around, everyone was genuinely excited for her debut album, which she had titled Addison. This album was released in June 2025, which was when I was still traveling in Europe. But honestly, by then, 5 of the 12 tracks were already released. I am very particular about singles. I have a rule where I can only listen to a maximum of 2 singles from an album before listening to the album. And I had used up those spots for Addison's debut album with Diet Pepsi and Aquamarine from 2024. To clarify, that means that I did not listen to High Fashion, Headphones On, and Fame is a Gun until the album was released. And I'm glad that I stuck to my rule, because if I had listened to these songs as they came out, only 5 of the 12 tracks of the album would have been brand new to me, and Life's No Fun Through Clear Waters and Lost and Found are barely count as songs. They're like interludes. I don't like that. When I listen to an album, I want it to be abundant well of new music, not something that is slowly drip fed to me through singles. It makes me feel like the project only cares about the tracks as, individuals, and not something that together tells a large story, which if you have been listening to me for this long, you'll know that is really important to me for albums. It is quite indicative of a larger trend in pop music these days that seem to have no use for the album as a body of work and focuses on these viral moments and signals. But for all my criticisms of this album promo, I actually really like this. Right off the gate with her first single, Diet Pepsi, Addison clearly wears her influences on her sleeve proudly. Diet Pepsi is the most blatant Lana Del Rey reheated nachos I have ever seen. And you know what? I too used to be a Tumblr girl in 2014 that glorified depression and being thin. So this was unfortunately right up my alley. continuing to borrow from the book of Lana Del Rey, Born to Die, not just in themes but also in approach to trip-hop, juxtaposing a supposed subtle and pulled-back genre with delusions of grandeur and opulence, as well as moments of self-reflection and introspection. With Lana, her fascination is with Americana mythology, this doomed romance paired with metaphors of death and addiction. Meanwhile, Addison is preoccupied with fame, of being the only girl in the world that matters, of being a star, of being in power, and using those visuals very effectively to further those points. This project is clearly the product of someone who worships pop music and pop culture, who adores fame, and who believes wholeheartedly that she is not only an accurate reflection of pop culture, but someone willing to become ahead of the pulchritudinous hydra that is pop music. And you know what? Respect that voluntary willingness to become part of this very chaotic mess that is pop. I definitely have a lot more to say about this album in the future, so I will save it for then because I just want to cover the rest of the albums for this video. But I am going to put this in year-end list material. Addison does have the makings of a pop girl, and I just have to admit that. My favorite songs are Fame is a Gun, which is perfect. Money is Everything is perfect. Headphones On has completely changed my perspective about trip hop, I'm ashamed to say. I'm ashamed to say that it took an Addison Rae song for me to get trip hop over the actual pioneers of the genre like Massive Attack and Portishead. Not because I'm ashamed of liking trip hop. Let's just be clear about that. I do need to know whether Addison Rae actually listens to Massive Attack and Portishead, or if her producers presented her this sound without her knowing the context of the genre, but liking it and subsuming it into her brand anyway. And then I listened to the Crawling Out the Deep End EP by Jamee. Jamee is a member of the indie pop band from New York, Michelle, an act of whom I've waxed poetic about repeatedly in this channel. Right now, it seems the group are going on an indefinite hiatus after releasing their last album, Songs About You specifically, in 2024, which is a devastating blow to me specifically because I really love this band. I enjoyed all of the releases that they put out, but I did foresee this announcement ever since Jamie started teasing this new project months before the group made it official information. I am sad that Michelle is halting their activities at a time where I feel like their traction is just about to pick up, but I can't fault them for wanting to move on with their individual careers, which is obviously what Jamie is doing with this new EP. This is actually a very short EP. This was released in 2025. It's very short with only 4 tracks. I thought it was a very sweet and very straightforward indie pop EP. I think Jamie has a very unique and easily identifiable voice, so I'm really happy. I liked her vocal tone, so it's really great to hear her voice take center stage in her solo projects. The strength that I liked about Michelle's music is their simple but very clever lyrics. The imagery they paint is rich but very relatable. The melodies are familiar, like something you'd hear played in the living room by your partner when you come home from work. This EP in particular is very cozy and romantic. It's just so easy to like. I'm putting this in French toast. My favorite songs are Unfold and Gambler. And then I listened to Enjoy Yourself by Kylie Minogue. Kylie Minogue is an Australian pop singer and actress. For the past 2 years, I have been embarking on a journey to listen to her entire catalog. Not necessarily in chronological order, but more or less. I tend to follow my feelings when it comes to choosing what to listen to next. A month before this video, I had listened to her debut album, Kylie, and now I am listening to her sophomore album, Enjoy Yourself. So this album was released in 1989. Kylie Minogue had shown an incredible amount of promise in her debut album, and she continues that momentum with these wonderful singles. Hand on Your Heart, Wouldn't Change a Thing, Never Too Late, and Enjoy Yourself are incredible examples of joyous, optimistic pop music. What I love about Kylie's persona is that she genuinely seems to believe that love and dancing is the meaning of life, and I can definitely get behind that. I do feel like her debut album did a better job of keeping that momentum and charm of love and dancing, because a good chunk of the tracks in this album feel like half-hearted filler. I realize that after listening to this album and the album after that is that maybe Kylie's weaknesses at least in this stage in her career, lie in her reliance on sentimentality to power her slower, sappier ballads like Telltale Signs, My Secret Heart, Tears on My Pillow, Heaven and Earth, which to me are kind of reheating this particular sound that was popularized by Hopelessly Devoted to You by Olivia Newton-John from Greece, which kind of came around the same time-ish, but just this really soppy, sad, beloved sound is not for me, or at the very least is not something I want to hear from Kylie Minogue. When she sings these B-sides, they are just like words on a screen that she's singing. I don't feel any particular emotion or moved by any storytelling, and that's not necessarily purely her fault. Of course, at this stage in her career, maybe she's a little bit inexperienced. Like, a lot of her vocal delivery is still at a very amateurish stage that can be masked easily if she's singing her dance pop tracks, but kind of becomes really obvious when she's singing these slower ballads. At the same time though, the songs themselves are not really giving her much to work with because it's platitudes, it's empty, it's cardboard. It's like a supermarket card that you buy on Valentine's Day when you forgot to plan something else. I think Kylie's talent, and she will eventually realize this the more she goes on, lies in these dance tracks that are exciting, catchy, has a lot of pomp and glamour to them. She will eventually learn how to vary her deliveries with these kinds of songs, but of course this is her second album, because if you compare how she sounds in the sad love songs in this album with such a powerhouse song and one of my absolute favorite Kylie Minogue songs like Put Yourself in My Place, like you can see the huge difference in skill, in intentionality, in how she delivers these things, and the specificity in which this heartbreak is portrayed. There is still kind of a wide-eyed innocence to her music that shows that she has still not really come into her power, into her potential, as we will hear later in her works. Most of the lyrics in this album still place her as a somewhat passive, pitiful creature that has to plead for her lover to keep loving her or to promise that they'll remain true to her, as seen in songs like Hand on Your Heart and Never Too Late. Or she's in the position where she's been wronged by somebody or left behind by somebody, like in songs like Tears on My Pillow and Telltale Signs, like Girl, Get Up, Lift Your Head, Your Crown is Falling. But she is still a far cry from the larger-than-life pop diva who wrote Can't Get You Out of My Head. We just have to be patient. This is playing into her innocent teenage girl next door suffering from puppy love shtick that she will eventually grow out over the decades. Thankful. Now, personally, I still do really like a lot of the songs in the album. I just don't know if I like it as an album. There's just so many duds in here for it to, all of the stuff that I love about it doesn't outweigh it well enough. My absolute favorite tracks are Wouldn't Change a Thing, Hand on Your Heart, Never Too Late, and Enjoy Yourself. They are new residents in my Kylie Classics playlist. I want to particularly shout out Enjoy Yourself. It is such a great closer, and no wonder it is the song that shares the title with the album. It encourages the listener to enjoy the moment as it comes, to find pleasure in life and seek out self-fulfillment through passion and dancing, a message that we see throughout the rest of Kylie's career. And it is really this final closing track that convinced me to pursue Light Years next instead of Rhythm of Love, which is the next album in her discography and would have made a more logical step in my deep dive. But as I said, I am a creature that listens to my instincts. And I do believe that jumping ahead again helps me learn more about the artist than if I had just listened to her albums in chronological order. It's again a great comparison to what she can do in the future and what she has to yet learn for then. Because of that, I am gonna put Enjoy Yourself in Gems Found in the Mind. So many wonderful treasure tracks that I will continue to return to in the future, but holistically it is a bit lacking. So as I said, I listened to Light Years next. This was released in 2000. Light Years is another dance pop album but is significantly different to Enjoy Yourself, where the 1989 release felt a little one note in line with the conventions of 80s synth pop. Light Years had more dimensions, incorporated different genres and even different styles of dance pop music. This is, of course, after Kylie has done a lot more of her experimental work in Impossible Princess, as well as the fact that 11 years has passed since then. Of course, it's going to sound different, but it's very cute to see that in both Enjoy Yourself and Light Years, the songs that share the same title as the album are also the closers. And both are great tracks that summarize the main points of the album. The contrast between how Kylie conducts herself in Light Years versus Enjoy Yourself is absolutely staggering. Gone is this simpering adolescent youth, and in her place is a literal goddess, commanding the stage and ordering you, the listener, to live your life to the fullest. The key words that describe this album are European, summer, travel, and hope. I think this is such a charming angle to approach love and dancing. Here, we see Kylie Minogue jet-setting to other places and it being such a clear influence in the different styles she dips her toes in. Please Stay has Latin elements with the guitar flourishes. We also see the Euro dance pop sensibilities in the song On a Night Like This, which has this really cool spliced up repetition of on a over and over. So together, it sounds like they're saying on and on and on. It helps you descend into a trance while dancing, so you keep dancing on and on and on, or loving someone on and on and on, which is a super clever, precise, and economic feature that contributes to the storytelling. The track Your Disco Needs You has a beautifully camp Soviet War era type sound that is clearly reminiscent of YMCA in the Navy or Go West by the Village People. Go West was also covered by the Pet Shop Boys, which I thought of when I heard this as well. I think there is a very rich queer reading to be had in this camp, over-the-top display of what is meant to be, of what should sound like a display of militaristic empire to the pursuit of pleasure. Kylie and her camp are drafting you in the war to be on the side of partying. Your disco is your nation, your dance partners are your comrades, and this is the real fight. We are not just traveling to places, we are also traveling back in time with a song like Cuckoo, reminding us of the 1960s beachy pop, as well as her cover of Under the Influence of Love, originally sung by Paul Politi and Barry White. We also travel back to Kylie's older catalog. Her penultimate song, Kids with Rod Stewart, has this excellent alt-rock vibes that harken back to Kylie's Impossible Princess era. The final song, Light Years, ties all of these ideas together as Kylie poses as an air hostess making an announcement to her travelers as they travel to the future and across space to venture into unexplored frontiers of love and passion. Underlying all the tracks is this theme of genuine hope and excitement for what the next day will bring. And Kylie has every right to be excited for that because as we have traveled forward, we could really see that she's only really getting better and better as an artist. The first track, Spinning Around, to me felt like an unintentional continuation of Enjoy Yourself, building up on Kylie's philosophy in the joy of dancing. Light Years is definitely one of her best, most memorable, most fun projects ever. It is just so incredibly charming. I am definitely putting this in French toast. And then I listened to Girls Will Be Girls by ITZY. ITZY is a K-pop girl group from JYP Entertainment that debuted in 2019. This is their 10th EP and their first comeback of 2025. The girls had embarked on a pretty long world tour. I got to see them perform in 2024. Since then, Yeji, one of the members, became the first of the group to release a solo project earlier this year with Air, which I had also previously reviewed. When I heard that they were coming back, I was really excited, and then I was promptly disappointed because I did not like this EP very much. And I hate to say that about an ITZY release because again, I love ITZY. If I get the chance to see them again, I would. But to be honest, I just found this EP to be a forgettable nothing burger. I think the paradox is that this EP is actually pretty cohesive if you actually analyze it. The sounds and the styles and the themes are all very connected and in line with what ITZY has done in the past. If you love girl crush concepts, then this project is definitely for you. But personally, I think I've just been really fatigued by them. It's not necessarily because there's just been a lot of groups doing them at the same time or anything. So many of my favorite ITZY songs are the ones that I feel like don't really align with that brand identity. I understand, very contradictory considering that this girl crush concept is so baked into their brand identity even from the very beginning. But That's just how I feel, and I just have no other option than to put this in. At least I learned something new. Favorite songs? I thought Kiss and Tell was at least pretty fun. It kind of harkens back to this electro dance B-sides style that we saw during the wannabe era of 2020, but otherwise I did not really find any of the tracks particularly memorable. And then I listened to From Our 20s by Fromis 9. Fromis 9 used to be a 9-member group that was created from the 2017 survival TV show Idol School and were managed by Stone Music for the first few years of their career. But in the year that Hybe labels bought out the company, their management got subsumed or transferred to the ones that manage the Pledis Entertainment artists. I don't really understand how this works, but that's kind of how I understood it to be based on Stan Twitter facts. This period of time left the girls in limbo for a while. Their fan base understandably rioted on their behalf because of the lack of promos and activities that the girls were given. Eventually, their contracts with their management expired and they did not renew their contracts. They instead moved on to different plans. 5 of the original 9 girls signed to a different contract with the label ASND and managed to keep the original name Fromis 9. It is a bit awkward since there are only 5 of them now, but I am really happy that they managed to get their original name. I think that's a huge legal win. I don't know how they managed to get that, but even Viviz couldn't manage that. So this EP is their first release since that whole debacle. This was released in 2025. It is a blessing to their fandom, and I am personally really happy that the members who wanted to keep going as idols and the girls who wanted to move on with a different career path could move on. I pray that the group's trajectory is similar to Viviz in that they can keep their previous audience while building a new one as they continue into their new era as a quintet. For the actual music itself, the EP is pretty pleasant and the title track is a solid effort. The production has depth that keeps it from being added to the growing pile of bargain bin summer sugar sweets that we get every year. The B-sides have got the genres that you would typically expect for a K-pop EP. It's got a new disco say-so knock-off track. It's got an R&B song. It's got a ballad that's dedicated to the fans. It's a formula for success that we will hopefully see pay off. But I don't really see myself returning to this frequently. None of the songs really stood out to me. I'm more impressed with the product being solid as it is. Good enough that enough goodwill has been created for me to check up on their next releases and be hopeful for their future. It's competent enough that I can put this in Gems Found in the Mind. Then I listened to Something Beautiful by Miley Cyrus. Miley Cyrus, another pop diva who had rewritten the pop culture book, but one whom I feel woefully inequipped to understand, much like Lady Gaga. My relationship with Miley's music sadly starts and more or less ends with Hannah Montana and the era directly after that. I have not gravitated towards her as one would expect given how entwined she is in the tapestry of pop girls. This is largely because I found her cultural appropriation in the 2010s pretty distasteful, and there was no point in my eyes in engaging with work that I did not respect. I still stand by that. That really soured my perception of Miley Cyrus for a while, and I have not had much meaningful relationship or experience with her work since then, aside from when her radio singles crossed the ocean. Usually, none of her singles really reach my side of the internet or really my side of the world, aside from Flowers in 2022, which she won a Grammy for, but which I also really hated. And this detachment from her likely contributed significantly to my surprise to this album. I'm not entirely sure how Miley's sound has progressed since I stopped paying attention to her. Her 9th studio album released in 2025, and it is an incredibly compelling project. I'm not really familiar with the album rollout itself. As I understand it, the visual film is meant to be a replacement for a tour. Cyrus doesn't seem to want that touring commitment. I wholeheartedly believe that the reception to this project depends on whether you consume this first as an album or as a visual film. I view them as pretty separate texts, and I wanted to receive the music as a text as it was presented to me. Diving into the visual film might be a really cool project to explore in the future. Let me know if that's something you're interested in. But the album can definitely stand on its own, largely due to Cyrus's unique voice. I mean voice in two different ways. Voice in the, literal sense. Her voice has changed over the years. It became lower with age and huskier, I'm assuming due to her smoking. This husky voice offers a unique color that not a lot of current pop girls have, aside from maybe Adele. And they are doing completely different things. So Miley really stands out as a unique and different. This has made the transition from pop girl to alt pop, alt rock genre a lot smoother for Miley. Her voice supports the intense emotional highs and lows of each song in the project. I also mean voice in the metaphorical sense, in the way that her perspectives, her point of view on life, on fame, on love, on grief are presented to us in this album. It can't be replicated or expected from the other pop girlies of today because they don't have that insane life that Miley Cyrus had. Overall, the key words that jumped out at me were resigned and eager. She sounds resigned, as if she has accepted the hand that fate has dealt her. There's a radical acceptance to how she sounds that makes it feel like she understands that with the agency that she has and has claimed for herself, she chooses the life that she wants to lead, but she knows that that is not the easy path. That's best exemplified in the track Easy Lover, but I also felt that way with tracks like More to Lose, Walk of Fame, and Every Girl You've Ever Loved. Perhaps you think that the keyword resigned directly contradicts the other keyword I chose, eager. However, I argue that Cyrus sounds so resigned to one's fate that there is really nowhere else for her to go, and you kind of circle back to being eager. She's eager to share, eager to feel, eager to move on, to forgive, eager to reflect, to experiment. You can hear this both in the songs End of the World, Something Beautiful, and Pretend You're God. I chose these two keywords to highlight Miley Cyrus's, for lack of a better word, hope for the future. I think it honors both the wisdom that Cyrus has earned with her long career, but also reminds us that Miley is 32. She has so many decades ahead of her. There is so much to experience, so many beautiful things yet to happen. I will be putting this record in year-end list material, so I will definitely be bringing this up later in the year. Whether it stays on the list or just in my honorable mentions remains to be seen. My favorite tracks are Something Beautiful, End of the World, and More to Lose. It is not lost on me that my favorite picks happen to be the singles as well. It's like they knew that these would hit the general public most efficiently. More to Lose is definitely my fave out of the three. It's so deeply moving and sad and relatable. Like there is so much regret and pain that can only really come from being at that age. It is deeply compelling and I really like it. And then I listened to Beautiful Chaos by Katseye. Katseye is the global girl group under Hybe labels that is taking the world by storm. They were the product of the survival TV show Dream Academy and debuted in 2024. They had gained some attention with their singles debut and Touch, but the girls have officially hit the mainstream earlier this year when they released their single Gnarly, a very calculatedly chaotic single that immediately got the sticker by NCT 127 treatment, except Gnarly is actually a good song. It was enough to get me pretty hyped for their next release. I was excited to hear that they were following it up with a project, but disappointed to find out that it was an EP and not an album. My critique of their debut EP was that it was too short, too sparse in substance, and did not show enough of the girls' talents, and to see that the mistake could be repeated in this new era was a letdown. I tried to be optimistic when I went into this EP, but unfortunately they just did not deliver. I don't hold the girls accountable for such a lackluster release, of course. They are a group that is barely 3 years old. I don't think that they could make a lot of decisions for themselves. I blame the company's plan or direction or strategy for the girls being the way that it is. I think the girls are perfectly capable of powering a much larger project, an actual cohesive album, and not just an EP full of singles designed to go viral on the internet. The singles are catchy and they contribute to the allure of Katseye as a brand, but nothing about that really sticks except maybe Gnarly, which lets itself go crazy with its absurdity. Gabriella is probably the most compelling track of the EP because of the subject matter. It's been a long time since we got a song like this. I can't think of another song that taps into that Jolene energy that is this widely listened to. Game Boy, the third single of the EP, is cute, but it is so bland. It's on the same wavelength of inoffensive polished pop that Touch is. The group is in its infancy, and I like the girls' group persona enough to wait for some time for them to grow into whatever they want to be. I am absolutely dreading this long as waiting game. It's an exercise in patience for sure. I'm gonna put this in, at least I learned something new. And lastly, I listened to Butterfly by Mariah Carey. Mariah Carey is one of the most prolific R&B singers of our lifetimes. Most know of her chart-topping Christmas single, All I Want for Christmas Is You, but those more attuned to the R&B scene will know her insane tracks, insane songs like We Belong Together, Obsessed, Touch My Body, but all of those happened in her later career. Meanwhile, we are reflecting on this record, which is her second album released in 1992. I have always wanted to dive deeper into Mariah Carey's discography, but just kept putting it off. However, there was a talk at a conference I attended in Paris that really intrigued me to start with this instead of her debut album, Daydream. It is also the perfect time to start, given that she is also coming out with a new album in September. This is the first Mariah Carey album I've listened to in full, and I'm sure many of her fans would approve of this as my starting point, because this is, I think this is her most highly praised project ever. At this point in her career in 1997, Mariah Carey was already incredibly beloved, with her debut album becoming an instant hit. But this record really cemented her spot in the canon of pop girls. You would only need to see the music video for the single Honey. Like, this is kind of off topic, but why is Mariah Carey tied up in a chair, and then why does she jump from a 2-story mansion into a pool, and then she undresses in front of a camera? I was so confused. But the point is that this wacky music video proves that she has a huge budget by the time this second album came out. And this record shot her to heights even higher than that debut album. I hope that makes sense. I have listened to several singles from this album already, such as Breakdown, which is one of my absolute favorite songs ever, and Honey and My All. I think those songs are pretty accurate hints as to what you'd find in the record. The keyword I chose for this album is honey. The word honey may seem like a cop-out, given that it is the title of the first track as well as the most popular single from this record, but I chose honey to reflect the warmth, the lightness, and the sweetness found throughout the project, specifically in the track Honey, in Baby Doll, and 4th of July. But honey also has healing properties. It has been used for thousands of years as balms to soothe wounds and as sweet medicine. Carey's music soothes the pain and hurt that you feel, best heard in Butterfly and Fly Away Butterfly Reprise. Carey is the butterfly that harvests the nectar, and through her music making, through her process of maturing, pruning her feelings, she makes the honey for herself and for others. I know that butterflies do not make honey, that is the job of a bee, but walk with me here. Carey is constantly in pain as she belts out in songs like My All, Breakdown, and Close My Eyes. Her music frames the hurt and heartbreak in such a beautifully tragic way. She is a butterfly with a broken wing, delicate, eternally suffering, wounded, in pain, but not pathetic. This record, like Honey, has no expiration date. It lasts forever. It is a labor of love. It belongs to everyone. However, as high as my praise is for this record, I find that too many of the songs are too down-tempo for me to return to it constantly. My favorite songs for sure are Honey and Breakdown, and the downside is that I love them so much that they kind of overshadow the rest of the songs, and I only really listen to these two whenever I think of this album. I mean, to be fair, these are really incredible songs to have as kind of the go-to songs anyway. In fact, Breakdown is my most streamed Mariah Carey song, for no competition there. You know what else you can use honey for? French toast. Yep. But I am going to put this in French toast. I think it is a very nourishing record, something that is worth the hype, and something I would definitely recommend to other people. And that's it. That's all I listened to in June and July of 2025. Here is a pie chart of my listening so far in 2025. Thank you very much for watching this video, especially if you made it this far. I think this is going to be like close to an hour long. Even though I only talk about 12 albums, I end up talking about them for an hour long. I am easing myself into posting more regularly, but as you can see, I'm still trying to get into the swing of things. I have work, I have school, I have my friends, I have my family, and I have my community to also focus on. I do have a lot of ambitious plans for the future. Yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to see more, please subscribe. My social media links are down in the description if you want to follow me there and see what else I'm up to. My Patreon and Coffee pages are also down in the description in case you want to contribute to this channel. Oh, and I would I would love to know what you guys thought of the albums that I talked about here, and whether you have any comments regarding my comments. Let's keep it going in the comment section. Okay, thank you so much for watching this video. I can't wait to share my love with you again next time. See you soon!